Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, February 1924, 100 years ago, the gas chamber was first adopted in the U.S. It was in Nevada, and it was adopted as a supposedly more humane way to execute people. On February 8th, Gee Jon became the first person to be executed by lethal gas. Capital punishment has existed for basically the entirety of this country's history, as has the push to find cutting-edge methods of executing people. And we've talked about that a lot on this show and touched on how you can see how the latest method of execution does a lot to reflect the political and social context of the time. So with that in mind, let's talk about what it means that in the progressive era, the United States is adopting a new method of killing those sentenced to death. And moreover, as I'm sure you know and have seen, what does it mean that this year, 100 years later, there was another high-profile execution by gas? We will get into that story just from this last month. But here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Let's start in that bigger question of kind of how a new method of execution does maybe reflect the era. What does it tell us about the progressive era that we're moving from hanging people and firing squads to using poison gas?
It's so in line with both the ethos of the era and the ethics of the era, which is this idea that you can apply science to make everything better. You can make it more humane, you can make it cleaner, you can make it more efficient. And for a long time, this was kind of lauded as, look at this great step forward. You know, it's called the progressive era, and that is laden with all of these ideas of kind of liberal and future-looking values. But this is also the era of eugenics and the idea of better breeding. And in addition to this idea of kind of better living through science, you're also getting better killing through science with something like the gas chamber.
I mean, this is also the era of xenophobia and intense anti-immigrant racism. It shouldn't shock anyone that the first person to sort of face the death penalty is a person of color. There's a lot of like extremes operating in this moment as well. It's like progressive, but not really. Like when you think about how these ideas are being implemented, particularly on the poor or people of color, it's a real problem.
When we think about this progressive era, I think you're exactly right, Kellie, that it is deeply embedded with this idea of white supremacy. And even the idea of Jim Crow was in some ways a progressive way of doing things. Mm-hmm. Instead of relying solely on extra-legal violence, you could rely on these laws that could shape and order a society.
Separate.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a sort of spirit of optimization that, is throughout the progressive era, and frankly, I think is very reflective of this era now. And so I think when you think of poison gas execution as part of that, it sort of starts to scan. But Kellie, to your point, the first person killed is Gee Jon, a member of a Chinese gang accused of murdering a rival gang member. It is on this chilly morning in February of 1924 that he is brought into a room where there is a heater that is turned on, and a liquid cyanide acid is meant to drop onto the heater and vaporize and execute him. As with most stories, it seems, of execution, there is a malfunction, and it turns into a sort of much more horrifying scene, and certainly cuts against this idea of progress and optimization and doing this in a way that feels more, I don't know if even the word humane was being used at the time, but the heater malfunctions. Most of the acid falls as liquid onto the floor. There was enough gas, though, of course, to kill Gee, who was strapped into a pine chair. But it took about 6 minutes as witnesses watched him lurch and die in front of their eyes. So
horrific. That's just horrific. It is horrific,
right? And, it's worth saying we also take a moment like that and we say, well, this was your solution to something like the firing squad or, hanging, which I know can go very wrong too. But I'm just curious what you make of the fact that this was like thought of as the more humane or more efficient method.
Well, it takes the executioner role and makes it less visceral than in the case of a shooting or a hanging. And I think that that's definitely part of it. I mean, the thing that I'm so struck by is that this was considered the more like cutting edge scientific way to do this. There was, even before things started to go wrong, there was resistance to this, and it was a very difficult thing to do. It was difficult to find the chemicals. It was difficult to transport them. You had prison guards who quit because they didn't want to take part in it. You had the coroner who didn't want to cut into the body because they were terrified of all the poisonous gas that was going to be inside of John's body. And it's interesting how it gets folded into a story of progress. And I think that a lot of this, the difficulties and the challenges kind of drop out.
Yeah. I think about two things in this moment. One, I'm thinking about how gas was used during World War I and how people saw that as inhumane, that there shouldn't be a way in which you can, kill people and yet preserve buildings and sort of like the surrounding area. And then the second part of it, I think, is that it's traumatic for the viewer, for the person who's observing this death. It's not quick. And as you talked about, how Gee is sort of like convulsing and his eyes are rolling back, and, people are actually stepping back from the window as they watch this, play out. These are gruesome things to experience, but equally gruesome to watch.
Yeah.
What I'm so struck by is that this has a pretty terrible start. It becomes the dominant form of execution in the United States into the 1980s. And what surprises me so much when we talk about eugenics, we're like, oh, everybody was super into eugenics. And then the Holocaust happened and they were like, oh, not a great idea. There are some downsides to this. The use of gas as an execution method in the concentration camps in Europe, you would think that would make the connection that gassing people to death has all of these horrific implications. And yet the U.S. does not deviate from it and doesn't stop doing it because of that connection with the Holocaust. It just stays as this primary execution method.
Yeah, it's really not until the 70s that it starts to fade away. And then, of course, now we've had a moment where it's come back, which we'll get to in a second. This larger context is really important. One, it is worth saying, and there's been some really interesting research by a professor at Amherst College. Most other countries sort of pick a method of executing people. A lot of countries have banned capital punishment, but most countries that have it, they pick a method. This is how we do it, and they do it. It's something in the American spirit. It's something related to all the things we're talking about here. But, the United States is constantly searching for a new method and has just keep trying things and trying things and trying things. And there's been research that has tried to quantify the effects of the different kinds of ways that we execute people. And over about 125 years, about 5% of gas chamber deaths deviate from standard protocol and cause unnecessary agony for the prisoner in the phrasing of some of these studies. And lethal injections are botched a little bit more, and things like hangings and electrocutions a little bit less. But here's something that I think is consistently, screwed up and has a lot of
the problem is you can't make a death like that humane. You really can't sort of I can't think of a possible way. And what's a way I can kill you that's not going to feel as bad? It all is going to result in the same outcome, which is death. And I don't know. I look at all of these lists of options. If I'm the person on death row, none of these look like a really good option to me. Maybe the firing squad might be the best because it seems quick and fast. But even being marched to your death in that way, all of the sort of anxiety that you would, be feeling is traumatic.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe. And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
Hosted by Lindsey Graham, Wondery's podcast American History Tellers takes you to the events, times, and people that shaped America and Americans. In the latest series, American History Tellers explores the Underground Railroad, a covert network of secret routes and safe houses operated by men and women committed to helping enslaved people escape bondage in the South. Follow American History Tellers on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts.
And it is a reminder of the uncertainty that is present throughout the process. We don't have a way that's 100% effective in, quote unquote, humanely killing people. We don't have a criminal justice system that's 100% in determining guilt and innocence. And that there is no way to make it 100%, which might be a good reason not to do it.
Yeah. Some of the details of the execution and the logistics of obtaining the materials for the execution are pretty remarkable and actually has a lot to do with this most recent story. I mean, the reason that there was a recent execution by gas is because a lot of the materials or a lot of the supplies for lethal injections weren't available and people started looking for other alternatives. There's these stories of back in 1928, the warden at this Nevada prison needing to find the cyanide that they were going to use to kill this person and had to drive to Los Angeles and then put it in the back of his truck, and he was very worried and people were not willing to do that, and he had to buy a fumigation device to be running in the back of his truck because he was worried about, everyone felt this was a dicey proposition throughout the entire process. Nevertheless, they pushed forward with it, and to your point, Nikki, it became not just a one-off experiment. It became, in many places the go-to method.
But isn't that so interesting that in each of these cases, including the current situation with the shortage of lethal injection drugs, the state finds a way. People are determined to find a method to kill people as capital punishment. And I think that's why the Gee Jon story is so fascinating. Is it was really hard to do this. And yet they were I guess I got to drive to Los Angeles. I guess I got to drive it in my truck. I guess I got to find a different set of prison guards to oversee this. There's just such a dedication to making sure this happens.
Right. And just to make clear your reference there were 4 prison guards who refused to participate in this. And, Nikki, to your point, if a big part of this is to try and kind of remove that sense of guilt or participation on the part of, an executioner or a hangman or whatever, clearly the prison guards at this prison still felt some of that if 4 of them refused to participate. The whole legal framework here and the sort of constitutionality and the humanity of this is a whole, other episode that we could do, but it is worth saying that, the U.S. Supreme Court has never ruled on the constitutionality of gas itself, but the UN Human Rights Commission has pointed to California's use of gas chamber and called it torturous and inhumane. And it is worth saying that basically no other country in the world has adopted lethal gas as a constitutional method of carrying out capital punishment. So,
that should say something.
Yeah, it says something, as is the case with a lot of the ways that we do capital punishment and the rates at which we do capital punishment in this country.
I think not just the ways in which it's implemented, but also who it's implemented upon. When you think about minors getting the death penalty, or people with mental disabilities getting the death penalty, or again, people of color being disproportionately represented among death row. There are so many factors that go into what gets a person on death row that I think is not always considered when we think about, who we execute.
Yeah. Quick thoughts on the story from just this year. Kenneth Eugene Smith, 58 years old, killed on January 26, 2024. The person put to death by nitrogen gas in this country. So the execution we were talking about of Gee Jon was with cyanide gas, a poison gas. I gather that the method with nitrogen gas, which is not poisonous on its own, but is that you pump enough into the body of the convicted person that it deprives them of oxygen and they die of asphyxiation. And so that is the method by which someone was killed in a gas chamber just this past month.
You know, I think about this story, and it just reminds me of maybe a year or so ago, we had Brian Stevenson speak at Wellesley, and he's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and famed civil rights attorney who often defends people who are on death row. I remember right before he went to speak, we were like sort of standing in the green room, and he was like, "Oh, I got to take this call." And it was brief, and his friend asked him, "Oh, is everything okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, my client just lost their, what is it called, a stay or something like that when you're trying to delay, stay of execution." And we were all like silent, which meant this person was going to be executed, and everyone in the room was just like, "Snap!" Obviously the work that he does is real, but it just hit so hard. And then in 10 minutes, it's like we're ushering him onto the stage to go and speak about this, very issue. The consequences are so real, but it's not often discussed among public circles. We don't often think about it until you get these big stories that come out. But people are executed routinely throughout this country.
Yeah. Well, one final tidbit that our researcher Jacob put into the prep here, and I suppose worth mentioning, but Donald Trump, former president, current presidential candidate, he has called for the death penalty for drug dealers. He's talked about bringing back firing squads and public executions. So, we shall see. And, I mentioned this at the top, we've done a bunch of episodes kind of largely around this issue. We've done episodes about executing animals, or putting animals on trial as well. And so it is very reflective. And obviously, Kellie, you know this better than anyone, but the public spectacle of hangings and firing squads is a huge reflective strain throughout American history. So let's leave it there, and let's try and turn the page a little bit here and talk about some also on this day. So these are other things that happened in this February 11th window throughout history. In 1937, this was a 6-week sit-down strike against General Motors that came to an end, and the company agreed to recognize the United Automobile Workers Union. And certainly resonant now. I think I read something about how last year was the biggest strike year, and automotive worker strikes last year had a real impact and progress. It is resonant to that moment that we're marking here on 1937.
Labor movement is back, baby.
I suppose so.
And on this day in 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin signed the Yalta Agreement, in which Stalin agreed to declare war against Imperial Japan following Nazi Germany's capitulation.
And in 2006, Vice President Dick Cheney accidentally shot and wounded Harry Whittington, a companion during a weekend quail hunting trip in Texas.
Folks, I am filled with shame that we are not doing that episode.
Yeah.
That we're not doing it.
Yeah.
I think it's been 4 years in a row that I've said we have to do the time that Dick Cheney shot a guy in the face while hunting. And here we are.
And the guy apologized.
Yes.
To
okay.
him.
So, yes, that are so many great stats. Let's do a little mini episode here. Maybe we'll do it in the newsletter. We have to, if there's any story that should be on our show and highlighted on our show, it's this one. I can't believe we missed a proper episode on the time that Dick Cheney shot a guy in the face. But yes, the big one is that they don't tell anyone for a couple of days, which is a little dicey. And then Whittington is at a press conference, and he apologizes to Dick Cheney for all the hubbub.
My face got in the way.
Oh my gosh, make it make sense. I can't.
Here's my idea. A mini bonus video episode with a dramatic reenactment.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And for what it's worth, Whittington also had lots of health complications as a result of this. This was no...
Yeah, because he got shot in the face.
Yeah, he got shot in the face. But anyway, there is a true moment in esoteric political history. All right, we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you. Thanks for listening to This Day in Esoteric Political History. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Martovich is executive producer. Yuri Lasordo is director of operations. If you want to support the show, tell a friend about This Day and become a member of Radiotopia at whatever level works for you. You can do that at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our site, you can find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find links to follow us on Instagram and and threads, buy merch like shirts and hats and phone cases, find information about our theme song, give feedback on an episode we've done, or suggest topics for a future episode. That and lots more, thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Abergan. We'll see you soon.
Radiotopia from P